The Valley Current.
Thank you guys all for joining. And today our last presenter will be Jack Russo, and he's also joined by Dr. Walter Bortz. So this is going to be a very exciting presentation, and I'll let Mr. Russo go ahead and give his introduction.
Yeah, I want to first thank you all, and especially both Michael and Maya, because they've been extremely flexible and helpful. So my name is Jack Russo. I'm the managing partner of Computer Law Group. I can tell you a bit more about myself. I'm going to do that in the course of this presentation and discussion, but feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I'll take them as we go along, or certainly by the end. I'm so happy and thrilled that Dr. Walter Bortz is present on the line as well. Thank you, Wally, for joining. He has been a good friend, a long-term friend for a long period of time. And last year, I dedicated the presentation to his father and him. But first, I want to remark that we only have a certain amount of time. Obviously, less than an hour will be used. I actually have an hourglass, which Wally gave me years ago. He probably doesn't remember. I'm putting it up on the screen to start the clock running, because this keeps track of the hour, and I'll basically keep it by my side here to make sure I stay on track, but stop me if I go off track. We lost an hour this week on Sunday, I guess technically Monday morning. I kind of have been catching up as a result. I don't know if that's what made me sick, but I dedicated last year's discussion to Dr. Edward Bortz, who's Wally's father, also a medical doctor, who did a great book that Wally also gave me as a gift called Creative Aging. Dr. Edward Bortz's major work on aging and health and how to make the most out of a life creatively from a creative point of view in a very creative way. And that book is a classic. Unfortunately, it's out of print. Hopefully Google will put it and make it available online. That's Wally as I knew him in the last few years, because we used to go running together. He had and used my computer law sweatshirt, which was great. That's my dad and my mom. I want to give some tribute to them, because without them, I wouldn't be here. That's me at the age of first grade, at the age of 6. I can say the last 6 decades have gone by very, very quickly. And although you all are roughly in your early 20s, and I've got the data on that, and I'm going to share it, because thank you for giving the poll, and thank you for motivating me to basically improve myself, which is part of what you're going to hear about. I want to spend a few minutes also thanking my wife, who's been just lovely, Dr. Lee Suter Russo. She's actually on the Zoom as well, and without her, I don't think any of this would have happened. She's taking her blood pressure there I think when we were on an educational trip. I want to say it was in Moscow, but she'll correct me. I was giving some lectures in Moscow in Russia years ago when you could travel to Russia. And that's our clan, which represents our daughters and grandchildren. That's me with my mom, who was at that point a great grandmother. That's 2 of my grandchildren, my youngest daughter's son and daughter, Massimo and Paloma. That's my eldest daughter, Danielle Russo, and she now has kids too. And, part of the story here is we've been on now a 3rd year sabbatical as a result of COVID-19. And my wife and I made a major move to support my mom, who was then at the very end of her life. As you can see, the Tampa, Florida medical people were removing her from her bedroom, because she literally called the hospital or called 911 and said she was feeling some pain. My brother had become sick. He was the support structure for my mom, my younger brother, And ultimately, he passed away of throat and tongue cancer. And we were with him at the very end in hospice, as were my grandchildren and my daughter, Anne Marie. And, he went pretty quickly. And sadly, it taught us a lot about the preciousness of life and the preciousness of time. That's my mom towards the end in a hospital. That's kind of what happens over a fairly lengthy period of time. And what it did for me is it really instigated a regime of improving my health. And what I'd like you all to do, if you're willing to do it, if you have a notebook or you can get a notebook or get a piece of paper, draw for yourself just 3 circles to start out with, like a Venn diagram, people would call this. It'll help you organize some of the thoughts I hope to leave you with, because these 3 circles were initially the way I thought of organizing my own life. And I'm going to help fill in those circles if I can help you do it. And in the bottom circle, you could say it's like a mouse, I suppose, but in the bottom circle, I like to put the letters HQ, standing for health quotient. Hopefully everyone can see that on the screen and basically see the circles that are in my little thinker's notepad. And you'll see in a minute why I'm suggesting you do that, because I'm going to give you a way and a structure to think about how to think about organizing what I would say should become a more healthy life over time. And that's what seeing all the death, my brother, my mother, resulted in an instigation towards learning about health. And that put me on the mat. By that, I mean, I began to religiously do yoga. And I have to say, I have, from a consecutive point of view, with the exception of occasional illnesses, very occasional. Yes, that's me, Wally. That's me literally on the mat. I'm still chubby there, but I've lost. And then today I'm proud to announce, because each of you have directly or indirectly caused this, my 60th pound of weight was off as of this morning. So literally, I was close at the worst of what I would call the beginning of the pandemic. I was close to 300 pounds, and now I'm literally under 230 pounds, 235 pounds under that weight. And really what I did is I learned that the saying, I mean, it's been around for a long time. I think it's attributed to Nietzsche. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I think my wife hates when I say this so often, and she'll explain why. And then I wrote down in the yoga studio, what doesn't stretch you makes you weaker. And I now live by that credo, because I've seen my blood pressure drop. It was originally something like 170 over 90, which is pretty high, particularly for my age, to 114, and then lower to 109 over 64. So some major health improvements. So the first circle, the bottom circle, is what I like to call HQ, or health quotient.
Recording in progress.
And think of it as we are really trying to improve our health, but it's the self-motivation that's going to do it. I mean, the health system exists as a safety net. It should not be viewed as the primary way in which you improve your health over time. In fact, you should be self-improving everything over time, not just the 3 essences that we'll start with, which is health quotient HQ, as well as intelligence quotient IQ, as well as emotional intelligence EQ. So you can fill into those other circles what might be called the other 2 essences. On my book, I've circled them in as IQ and EQ, and you'll see in a minute why I think this is important. But over time, Lee and I did consecutively 156 sessions at one yoga studio, and then we moved to a larger house as needs included the fact that Lee's mom, who was then close to the end, moved in with us as well. So we were literally taking care of 2 moms in Tampa, Florida, in a larger house, with the view of helping them with end of life so they didn't have to be put into a facility, which is what their preference is. And I know Dr. Wally Bortz and I have talked about the desire to plan the end. And I think he has said to me repeatedly, he wants to be in his house and his plan is to make it to 100. He's written the books about Dare to Be 100. And he's having his 93rd birthday in 5 days. At the end of this, we'll sing him happy birthday. But I started to think about what are these other things that might be thought of as important in getting from the data about how you can improve yourself to the information, knowledge, and wisdom of how to go about improving it. And the jump off point is if you think about where we are, even just looking back through what might be called 10,000 or more years, we've really improved the global population of standard of living and the rest really over the last couple of hundred years, and maybe even arguably, so far as China and Russia are concerned, over the last 50 or so years. And you can see what the curve of human history is suggesting is the acceleration of what's going on over time. So this is one way to think about what Silicon Valley is enabling, and more than Silicon Valley, really the entire global economy is enabling. Because we shouldn't have situations like my brother, which, because he smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day from age 14 to the end of his life. So really about 50 years of smoking because he died at age 64. That really shouldn't happen. That the course of human history is such that we shouldn't see that sort of thing happening. So in some ways you could say to yourself, what's going on is and we're joined by Dr. Leonard Hayflick too. So thank you, Leonard, for joining, because part of the tribute I have is also a tribute to you, because Leonard and I have taken up a discussion over a period of time about what is it that we have to learn from aging that's happening over time. Now, let me just first tell you what this discussion is not about, the discussion we're about to have. I don't know how many of you have used ChatGPT. I now have become a regular user of it. It is a form of artificial intelligence. I like to think of it as more augmenting human intelligence. It's often wrong, but I did put in this morning, because they've given me access to GPT-4, which is the latest and greatest version of it. The folks at OpenAI have given me advanced early access to it. And I put in lists of various ways scholars have talked about extending both lifespan and health span to beyond 100 years of chronological age. I just happened to type it in all caps. I don't know why, but I thought it would be helpful. It quickly came back literally within seconds with this list. Scholars and researchers, and this is not what the topic is, but it's more what the topic is not about, have explored various methods, and they have included caloric restriction. Well, I'm doing that now with the goal of losing another 40 pounds if I can do it. I know my wife, Dr. Suter, has said, you're crazy. That's way too much weight. But I'm trying to get down to what I would call my high school weight. That will be my magic dare to get to 100 pounds of weight off from my worst case near 300 to hopefully my best case more like 195 if I can do it. I've got about another 40 pounds to go. There are pharmacological interventions. I've decided not to use those. There's things called telomere extension. Dr. Hayflick may give us some commentary on that. There's senolytics, there's gene therapy, apparently stem cell therapy, hormone replacement therapy, regenerative medicine that's being done at Stanford and elsewhere, nanotechnology, and then artificial intelligence. Now, I'm not going to talk about any of those things, but I thought it would be useful to put them on the screen just to make sure people would understand that I'm not here as a scientist. I don't want to talk so much about the quantity of lifespan as I want to talk about the quality of lifespan and the quality of health span and the quality of work span and the quality of what I'm calling play span, what we do with our time. And Maya, who ran the statistics for us, ran the poll for us, thank you, Maya, for doing that, enabled this little set of slides from the class about how people feel about their lifespan versus their health span versus their brain span versus their work span versus what I'm now calling play span or retirement. And then where are they in chronological versus biological age? Now, these are summary statistics, they're averages. If Dr. Sam Savage were on the line of Stanford, a good friend of mine and a client, he'd say there's lots of flaws in using averages, but I can tell you that the data is suggestive that everyone believes that their retirement or playtime in life is going to be far less than their work time, although you could argue maybe work can be like play, and that ultimately their brain span is going to be less or roughly as much as, if they hope for it, as their health span. There are differences between men and women, and that lifespan is going to be longer than both health span and brain span. And that's some interesting data if you think about it. Obviously, you would expect that because we see older people start to lose health and start to lose cognitive abilities. Although I have to tell you, both Dr. Bortz and Dr. Hayflick are very much right there. And I think they're both technically still working in knowledge work that they do. So I also asked for some data about average sleep, and in general for students, it looked like people were getting at least 7 hours of sleep a night. Women were getting more than men, but the amount of exercise was per month was relatively low compared to, say, what might be argued to be what other people are doing. So here's some pie charts to give you some sense of how you as a class reported your sleep time versus your exercise time versus your other time, which I think other time really is code for your thinking time. You're spending a lot of time doing things other than sleeping and other than exercising. Now, you could also be very much thinking along the way. So think about it as we are in a new world where work is very much part of the picture. It's very much part of what we do. It's very much part of what we can expect to do over time. And we want to do it well. So now I'd like to go, with your permission, to the rest of the conversation, or rest of the discussion. This conversation is what I'm calling next generation lifestyle management, not lifestyle medicine, but lifestyle management. And think of it as, we want to think of that duration of life as something that we manage and we control. So most of us, I think, are at Stanford. I'm not. I'm still in Florida. I've luckily been able to do this by Zoom. I've described a little bit about our law practice and about the Foundation for Creativity. It does provide support for the class, and it's happy to do that. It's also supportive of the idea of the Healthy 100 Years Initiative, a nonprofit with the goal of education to expand human potential. So I was lucky enough to see Silicon Valley go from what might be called Silicon Valley 1.0 to Silicon Valley 2.0. Yeah, so this is where we are. Next generation lifestyle management. This goal to sort of manage your own lifestyle for the benefit of HQ, health quotient, IQ, intelligence quotient, and EQ, emotional intelligence quotient. But those are not all the quotients that exist, because if you've done the 3 circles, you're going to see in a second that there's more to be discussed. So most of you are in Stanford, which is in Santa Clara County, which is in Silicon Valley, which is in Northern California. It's an innovation center of the world. I luckily was able to come out from the East Coast to the West Coast for law school. And I luckily, upon graduating from law school, was able to come to a then very young firm, Davis, Stafford, Kelman, and Fenwick in Palo Alto, California. They're now in Mountain View. They outgrew Palo Alto, if you can believe that. There wasn't enough office space for all the lawyers. I left to start my own firm that's now called Computer Law Group. We have an affiliate called Entrepreneur Law Group and a side venture fund called Florence Venture Partners. And we also have a nonprofit foundation called the Foundation for Creativity in Dispute Resolution, but it's becoming more the Foundation for Creativity. It supports things like Healthy 100 Years, which is designed to support things like lifestyle medicine at Stanford and other universities. So I was lucky enough to arrive at the time of Silicon Valley 1 becoming Silicon Valley 2. Two guys went into Davis, Stafford, Kelman, and Fenwick. Their names were Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Wozniak is still alive. Jobs died of pancreatic cancer. Dr. Bortz likes to say Jobs died of health illiteracy. He can comment on that at some point. I remember us having some long discussions about how money doesn't necessarily buy you health, but it can at least buy you health literacy. And his view at the time, and I agreed with him, was that Jobs, as smart and as wealthy as he wasn't as literate about taking care of his health as he should have been. That's a separate story for a different time. But those two gentlemen, dead broke, wanted to start a company. They had in mind the name Apple, just the word Apple. The partner that was in charge of corporate formation at the time thought it was crazy. For that reason, the firm didn't end up taking stock for fees, but required payment of cash. That's a whole nother story for a whole nother time. I watched Silicon Valley 2.0 become Silicon Valley 3.0 and a networked model. That networked model eventually became an internet network model that was very much supported by Google, still is. Google is still the major search firm, although ChatGPT may well become a complement, if not a substitute. And we've seen Silicon Valley 5.0 happen with all the apps that are out there that are interconnected. And we're headed towards, if not already in, Silicon Valley 6.0 that we can talk about. I can't necessarily say that the legal profession has gotten to 6.0. I tend to think we're stuck in kind of 2.0 or 3.0. I think medicine is headed more towards Silicon Valley 5.0, although various people think it may be stuck in 2.0 or maybe 3.0. So if something good happens today, it will be like this, the light bulb going off for some, or ideally all of you. Can you guys see that picture with the head tilted? It's a little GIF file that I found today.
Yes, we can see it.
Good, you can see it. So the idea of the notebook and the idea of you keeping track of what I'm about to say in your notebook is because I want to give you a strategy for thinking about how things are going to change over time. And hopefully some sort of light bulb will go off, and that light bulb will cause you to think about engaging in a way that isn't the traditional charge by the hour, charge by the grain as the sand and the hourglass drops through, which is the legal profession, which I think we're getting away from, but something that pays attention to the quality of the available time in hopefully a healthy 100 years. And by the way, the statistics this year compared to last year, where there were some people who believed that they would live to the age of 110, that's supercentenarian stage, which last year, I think the maximum number that we saw respondents were at 100. So as a group, perhaps lifestyle medicine is causing people to think that they can push it to an additional 10%. But my hope they're thinking about the quality of that 100 years. The range on lifespan was 70 to 110 on the data. Health span was 40 to 100. Brain span was 30 to 100. Work span was 30 to 70. Play span was 0 to 70. And chronological age was 18 to 28. Biological, this is just the range. Biological age was 19 to 35. And on the sleep per month, it was as low as 80 hours per month. Whoever that is getting very little sleep, to 260, literally more than 3x in terms of the range. And exercise was as low as 10 to somebody put down over 100 hours of exercise a month. So they're even beating my numbers, and my numbers are pretty high these days. So the question I raise is, how could this guy, that's me, as I was literally starting law school and getting my first bank account, back then we used to have a little ID card. There wasn't an iPhone, there wasn't a smartphone. There weren't even cell phones back then. And the takeoff of the discussion is what I would call Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because our physiological needs, with the exception of an occasional power outage, are pretty much satisfied in today's world, as are generally our security needs, although obviously the news about drones being knocked down in neutral territory is not good news. But these basic physiological and safety needs that Maslow talked about are pretty much accomplished in today's world. Not totally, not globally, but certainly in Silicon Valley and certainly in most of the United States. The action really is around psychological needs and self-fulfillment needs. And we get less than 1 million hours to basically carry out what might be called the calling of our life. What is the calling, and then how do you achieve it? Because one healthy 100 years is basically going to be sleep for about a third of it, as your data showed, other activities for another slice of it, and then the rest of it is really thinking time. And if you think about it, a life roughly has, unless you're like Dr. Bortz and Dr. Hayflick and other people who are pushing now more 50 plus and maybe even 60 plus years of thinking and leadership type thinking, thought leadership thinking. In general, it's roughly 40 years or so remaining, because you're going to get about 30 to 33 years of sleep. Now, you can do some thinking in your sleep if you're actually tracking your dreams. Some people are. So think about it as there really are 7 essences. And now I'd ask you to go to your notebook and tell me if you see the other 4 slivers that you created with the 3 circles that were HQ, IQ, and EQ. You should be able to see that there are 4 other places, namely these little slivers, if you've made enough space. And I'd suggest to you that there's 4 other essences that I call PQ for passion quotient, AQ for ambition quotient or actualization quotient, and FQ for freedom quotient. And in the very, very center, when all of them overlap, all 6 of the others overlap, is that center that I call CQ, which I suggest is, I use 7 S pairs, words that start with the letter S, to say that soulful and spiritual is at the very top of might be called the compassion quotient. And I came up with this, I actually still have the napkin here. I think I was literally traveling in an airport and I was starting to think about, and I still have the napkin from the American Airlines check-in. I've actually kept it all these years, where I started to think about how would I educate my daughters who were about your age. My 2 daughters at the time were about in their early 20s, on how they should think about their own life and how they should think about the quality of the relationships that they would establish. And I put at the very foundation what the medical school is all about and what this program is all about, which is your health quotient. And I said, you really want to be and become and remain both sane, sober, and the third factor in the triangle is strong. Well, I didn't write that down, but if you could be strong, sane, and sober, you're on your way to a healthy foundation. Now, by sane, I obviously mean mental health. By sober, I mean avoiding addictions, including in my case and my entire family's case, what I would call a food addiction. We like to eat. We're Italians. The Italian meals are large and robust and have lots of calories. And definitely something that results in weight gain over time. And you want your health to basically promote what I would say a form of happiness over time. This is one of the older supercentenarians. He's 112. Of course, he claims he smokes and drinks and has remained still fit. So I guess you could engage in certain things that would be questionable. So the second quotient was EQ. Daniel Goleman has written extensively on it. The S pairs that I like to use are sensitive and supportive. And I tend to think that there's a third S as well. And you could fill this in if you're filling in your chart, you would put sane and sober in the HQ box, just to sane, sober, and strong, if you want to use all three words. For EQ, you would use sensitive and supportive. And I think there is a third word that starts with the letter S, but I'm going to suggest that people type in what the third word should be that they would agree is at the base of the triangle of emotional intelligence. And HQ and EQ and means obviously not putting your head in the sand. And they're related. HQ and EQ are related because as your emotional intelligence improve, it's my theory, and there is some science to support it, that your health will improve as well. And that's probably because you'll get better sleep, among other things. And it does improve or not daily. And often it kind of depends upon what you're doing with your time and who you're doing it with. And really, to some degree, you have to have good relationships to do it well. And it may well affect not only health span, which of course will affect lifespan, but also brain span, because dementia risk is lowest for people 75 or older with strong relationships. So intelligence quotient is the third, which is smart, savvy, and there's a third word that I suggest people fill in. So we've got sane and sober and strong, smart and supportive, and you put in the third S word, and smart and savvy, and you put in the third word, and sensitive and supportive, and you put in the third word, the third S word ideally, and put it by text, and we'll do a little raffle at the end for a prize for whoever contributes the best set of words, or any words at all for that matter. So think about it as those three major circles will be foundational to you establishing for your life the way Dr. Bortz has done for his life in talking about getting people to see that they can make their way to 100 years old. And Dr. Leonard Hayflick's purpose in life, which I think is pretty much explained to people that there is a limit to what your age can be. And the limit is somewhere at about, but you'll correct me, Len, about 120 to 125. There's some data that suggests that Marie Calmon made it to 126. I'm not sure whether that data is accurate. Len Hayflick wrote a book that I think may speak to the issue. There are literally laws of physics, the second law particularly, that will limit what the totality of your lifespan can be, as well as, of course, your health span. And what is the etiology of aging is to some degree undetermined. And yet there isn't really enough research on what it is that are all the determinants of it. But I'm not speaking to that as much as the quality of life, which is how do you combine your health, your emotional intelligence, and your intelligence, your HQ, your EQ, and your IQ, to make your purpose in life something that you very much feel good about, that you want to feel good about. So purpose will drive everything, and purpose is important. And think about purpose as something that you have to decide. It doesn't really get decided for you. It can be indirectly influenced, obviously, by lots of people. And I can tell you there's lots of stories about different people that have influenced other people. Certainly, I've been under a lot of good influence by Dr. Bortz, as well as Dr. Hayflick, as well as many other people, both at Stanford and elsewhere. So think about the next little sliver that you fill in as AQ, which is actualization quotient, self-motivated and self-aware. And the gentleman who I think best described this has a website called Pursuit-of-Happiness. He's Professor Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I was lucky enough to meet him at Dr. Bortz's house, where he was a guest for a period of time while he was a fellow at Stanford. He wrote a book that's called Flow, How to Achieve Optimal Performance. And he talked about getting into the state of actualization, how we use challenge over time to push ourselves to acquire greater skill. So as you acquire greater skill, you should be taking on more challenge, which means you should expect to get into a zone of anxiety. You should welcome anxiety because that's going to promote greater skill. So as you think that anxiety might be a bad thing, it's actually a good thing. For those of you who are skiers or snowboarders, you know, in going from green slopes to blue slopes to black slopes to double black diamond slopes to off-piste backcountry slopes, you are pushing challenge to improve your skiing skill, and you're going to be in anxiety some of the time to cause that to happen. And that is very much part of putting yourself in a position where you become a master of your life, both your work life and your play life, in what you do in a given day, because you achieve a certain sensation of satisfaction from the flow state that's created as your skill matches the challenge and anxiety pushes you to a higher level of skill. You want to push that flow challenge. You want to push yourself into that challenge. You want to improve yourself over time and ideally improve others. This, to me, is central to self-motivation. This is what we should be teaching people how to acquire over time, or how to self-acquire over time. Because what happens when you get into this state of flow, and we really probably should have put in the survey whether people get themselves into the state of flow, because it's a state where goals are clear, there's feedback, there's a balance between opportunity and capacity, or what might be called challenge and skill. Your concentration deepens, you're present in the moment, the light bulb has gone off, control is no problem. There's a sense of time dilation, that is, time is either slowed down substantially or it speeds up. When I was a graduate student working in New York while going to graduate school, getting a master's degree in computer science, I remembered being in deep flow when I was coding projects for the university. And I would be doing the program code in the middle of the night, and literally hours would pass by and I would not even notice the time. And finally I had to go to the bathroom, and that's what would jolt me to actually get out of that sense of deep focus. There's a complete loss of ego, and it's self-motivating, because as you acquire this ability to push yourself in this direction, where you're pushing your skill, your level of skill to the next level, and you're getting into this state, it moves you into getting more and more challenge and more mastery over time. This, to me, is very much part of where lifestyle management, what I'm calling next generation lifestyle management, is headed, or should be headed, in having individuals recognize that they have a degree of influence and control over their 7 essences, in improving their 7 essences, and in also enabling their own freedom their ability to be successful and spontaneous, and add another S word and help me with this, or help me think about this, over time. So think about it as we go up this curve of essences, as we make our way up over time, we get to a compassion quotient. We get to a point where we want to share these thoughts with others. We want others to be able to take advantage of this thinking and push more and more people. And here's my message for today. What would this planet look like if everyone were able to push themselves in a very autotelic way to the next level? That is, if health improvements, or maybe health quotients, improved globally, everyone became more intelligent, everyone became more trusting. HQ, IQ, and EQ for everyone became such that they all could get to their higher level of passion, to all be able to accomplish their actualization and flow, to have the freedom that we're all God-given and entitled to, and to become more cooperative. Imagine that the 7 essences over time, or what I'm calling the 7 essences, lead to that improvement of all of society over time. What would the planet look like? The planet would be evolving in a way that would be far, far beyond where we are today, it seems to me. So I'll stop here. I know I've used a lot of my time. I'll take questions, whether by voice or by text. That's a funny picture from many years ago when television was first introduced. Those are called rabbit ears. For those of you who never saw an old TV, an old black and white TV literally has these ears that would get the signal. And so Silicon Valley is very much about stimulating innovation. We're going to see a set of eyeglasses come out from Apple and others. I don't know whether they're going to call it an iPhone or eyewear or eye something. It's probably going to map to some degree to your smartphone. Whether you use your smartphone or not is yet to be seen. But imagine that we're going to see a world in which information is readily available, data is readily available, knowledge to some degree is readily available, but wisdom may be lacking. And wisdom, hopefully, that you can structure around the 7 essences. I hope they give you a structure to think about improving your life and improving the lives of others, including the next generation. So with that, I'll stop, take whatever questions you have, and thank you all for your time and attention, because some people have given us some ideas for stable and serenity. Those are really good S words. I would say they can be included. Satisfaction is a third S word, because we do want to get to that. I mean, there can be funny music added along the way, because I think of the Rolling Stones, which were a great band in my era from the 60s. And obviously there's a great song that's useful. So Len, do you want to take a minute to give people a sense of what you think? Dr. Hayflick, I think, is still on the line. Now, you want to take a minute, Len, to tell people more about what you think the limits are to ultimate lifespan or health span, if you're still on the line? I don't know. I thought I saw that you were on the line. I thought I saw that you were on the.
You hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thanks, Len. Thanks for joining. This is so marvelous. We couldn't do this years ago, but today the marvel of technology allows it. Len takes care of himself. He's 94 years old, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, Len. You're going to be 95 in the fall, right?
No, next month.
Next month, you'll be 95, right?
In May.
In May, you'll be 95. You're living on your own,
Yes.
taking care of yourself on your own. Bravo to you. It's amazing. So tell us what you think.
Well, to answer your question about the maximum period for human longevity, both Wally and I believe, and there are many others as well, that the termination of human life and animal life in general is based on the second law of thermodynamics, which may sound very complicated, but it's really quite simple. It's based on energy. We're born with a certain amount of energy that we use throughout life, and it gets increased over time in respect to the amount of fuel or food that we take in. But the finality of animal life is based on the second law, which says that energy tends to spread out or dissipate unless it's constrained. The constraint is in chemical bonds. All of our molecules are held together by chemical bonds. The very complex proteins that we may have seen pictures of or diagrams of illustrate the necessity for the bonds between atoms to remain static throughout life. But in fact, those bonds, which are generally hydrogen bonds, but there are other types as well, those bonds are constantly in a state of tendency to break. And that is the definition of the second law. With the constraints on the breakage is what maintains the activity and the ability to function of our essential biological molecules. Over time and the expression of the second law, those bonds will break. We will incur dysfunctional molecules, even in the repair processes in our bodies, of which there is an enormous content. But the repair shops, like the repair shops for automobiles, also age like the automobiles themselves. So that over time, especially after reproductive maturation, let's say around 30, 35, or 40, the ability for repair shops to repair these mounting dysfunctional molecules decreases because the shops themselves are showing the same signs of aging or loss of functionality in the essential molecules in those repair processes. So that as time goes by, this random process will ultimately result in loss of physiological capacity in some vital organ, mostly the heart. The heart seems to be the weakest link in the chain of major organs that are essential for life. So that is the explanation that many of us in this field believe is true. In respect to the telomere theory, it's actually not a theory, it's a statement of events that occur. The events that occur at the ends of chromosomes, where the ends at each replication of the cell in which the chromosome is contained, at each replication, the end of the chromosomes disappears, or I should say more accurately, is not copied. Many people believe that that's a source of longevity, but in fact, that's never been shown to be the case. But it is the case that telomeres decrease in length as cells replicate. It's a rather complicated story, and I don't want to go into it in light of what our major concerns are here. So I'll return back to Jack.
Great. Thank you, Len. I really appreciate it. And I've been flashing on the screen your book, which is a classic and it's highly recommended. And to me, it represents just some of your work, because obviously I believe, and maybe my calling in life is to point out to people the Nobel Prize laureates that should receive the prize while they're still alive, which would include you as well as Wally, because both of you have done amazing work in a field that really is a challenging field, and which there are a lot of other people now entering on your shoulders, but not necessarily recognizing you in the way, or you or Wally, in the way that you should. So I want to end the discussion with something that I used before. I want to use it again, and for a couple of reasons, if it'll work. I don't know if I've done this before. I'm going to try it. But a year or two ago, I think it was actually 2 years ago, I did this lifestyle management lecture, and they actually published it on YouTube, but it was a different lecture with a different set of points and a different set of principles, and it's worth watching. And I can put the YouTube link in the chat, but I couldn't find the pictures that I used. So I went back to what I found in YouTube, because I ended with a point that I wanted to make about the way in which life is a roller coaster. And we'll see if this works, because it may not. It's the first time I've ever tried to play a roller coaster. And the point I made by way of analogy is that life is very much like a series of roller coaster rides. And, these rides can either be joyful or can be painful, depending on how you decide to process the ups and downs of life. And what I said is very much that roller coaster is getting bigger and bigger. And even though you have more control and more influence, who you're with makes an awful lot of difference. So I'm lucky enough to be with Dr. Lee Suter. She's been with me for this ride, and there's certainly been lots of ups and downs. We've gone through a lot of painful times together. We've also gone through lots of joy together. And thinking about using the 7 essences as a structure for how you improve yourself and your significant other, or how you choose your significant other, is something to think about, because it gives you a bit of a checklist, far better in my way of thinking than whatever Tinder or Match or other social media give you, in thinking about how to think about a person's health quotient, emotional intelligence quotient, EQ, IQ. That's me talking on the side. A couple of years ago, I got the mute button pressed. But you'll see these roller coasters always show two people. There's always literally a side-by-side approach. And that's by design, because they recognize that people want to be next to the person that's going to be sensitive and supportive, the person that's going to be right by their side, to take them through the ride, which they know is going to cause anxiety. But at the end of the ride, they're hopefully going to experience some joy. And during the ride, they're going to experience some joy. And so the way in which you can think of life is you're going to have some moments where there will be the equivalent of a life-quaking event, like your parents dying, like your children getting ill, like yourself or your spouse or your significant other getting ill or dying. And you have to become resilient to that part of the roller coaster. And you have to expect to manage that and to hurdle it and to treat it as just part of the ride. And I think more and more, if you think about life as a series of roller coaster events, where getting through Stanford may have seemed to be a challenge, but once you've completed your course of studies, you're open to your next challenge, and you want to take up your next challenge, and you want it to be significant, and you want it to improve your skill level over time. And you want to get to the point where you say to yourself, the ride has been enjoyable and you fulfilled everything that you were meant to fulfill with the talent that was given you. So I couldn't have imagined as a young 6-year-old in first grade in Brooklyn, New York, ever making my way to present to a group of students at Stanford Medical School. I would never have thought about that for a minute. But thankfully, as a result of a number of events that occurred over life, I got to meet lots of different important and influential people, including many at Stanford, including Dr. Bortz, including Dr. Hayflick. So I want to thank them for enabling me to get to where I am today and to get to these thoughts to convey to you and hopefully for you to convey to the next generation. So with that, I'd ask you to all join in with me to sing happy birthday to Wally because it's his birthday on Monday. He will be 93 years old. So Wally, we're going to sing now. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you, Wally. Happy birthday to you. And many more, even beyond 100. Maybe your next book will be Dare to Become a Super Centenarian. And I hope that's true for both you and Dr. Hayflick, because your minds are still intact. You're very capable people, and you both deserve the Nobel Prize. So I want to thank you both for everything that you've given to me and to Dr. Suter, my wife, and how you've enabled us to experience great joy and great enjoyment and great intellectual challenge. Thank you, Dr. Fredrickson. Thank you, Maya. Thank you for allowing us this hour of time. And thank you all. The hourglass is just about dribbled down. We're right at the end. So thank you very much for staying the time. Thank you for the contributions of thought. Thank you, Wally, for coming.
Jack, thank you for the great lecture again and for all your support of everything we're doing, and really appreciate it.
Oh, we love it. And we love taking care of you guys and hoping that we can do this again next year and we can sing happy birthday again to Wally next year and do it in person, obviously, next time.
That sounds great. Thank you again for this wonderful lecture.
Thank you,
Thank
Mike.
you, guys. Have a blessed day.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Take care.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.